All right. Well, we are excited to be together once again. This year, we are on our sixth community conversation. Welcome, 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 everyone who is here and everyone who is watching. My name is Reverend Michael Slack. I am the community minister for worship and spiritual care for Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. My colleague and friend, Dr. Takia Amin, who is BLUU's content director, won't be with us tonight. I wanted to just lift her name up in this space because she's an amazing human. And we worked together have worked together to build this programming over the course of the year. I am really happy to have us all together tonight because our focus is the fifth principle of Black lives. As many of you know, um, the seven principles of Black lives was really the very first thing that BLUU put out into the universe back in 2015, and it was our recognition of the value of those principles last year and thinking about how we really dive in to proclaim a Black Unitarian Universalism. It made sense for us to offer up these principles as a foundation for that work and for that understanding and for that learning. And so our purpose here tonight is to dive deep into the fifth principle, to really talk about it and understand it better for ourselves and for one another, and for our faith and for the world. Um, we knew way back when during the convening that happened in 2017. We got even clearer about it during the revival in 2018, um, and also from a survey that we did in 2018. It became really clear that what Black Unitarian Universalists were wanting and needing was to really dive deep into the theology of Unitarian Universalism, right? That is what folks really, really wanted and needed. And so ultimately, we decided to do theology in a big way in 2019. We started with the Whose Faith Is It Anyway panel back in January and have really touched on every principle leading up to now. We were planning to do this conversation back in June and we postponed it to August. So we're happy to be here. So we're kind of stepping back a little bit. We did the sixth principle last month in July with Rosemary Bray McNatt and Leslie Mack. That video should probably be up on our YouTube channel at this point. And we are here to talk about the fifth principle. I'm really excited to have a wonderful special guest with us, Kris McElroy. Kris is mixed transgender man, mixed Black transgender man living with multiple disabilities. Are you still in Maryland? You are still in Maryland, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Um, he has studied quite a bit in psychology and in multidisciplinary human services. He's an artist, an educator, an author, um, community engagement volunteer, and advocate. Kris really, really serves and interacts across a variety of different populations, really seeking to promote change by addressing the root causes, stigma, and other issues related to topics around trauma and disabilities, race, mental illness, gender identity, poverty, social justice, and identity. So we're really, really happy to have Kris with us. I met Kris at Revival, and it's like anytime we do anything, I really need to just call Kris McElroy because Kris is fantastic and can add so much to this conversation. We were supposed to have with us Monica Cosby, um, who is a poet and activist. Her primary ministry is out of the UU Prison Ministry of Illinois, but she had an emergency meeting tonight. And so, unfortunately, she is not going to be able to be with us, but we are moving ahead with our conversation. And I probably have a few things to add to the topic as well. So Kris and I will, I'll go through some questions with Kris and respond to those just to give you a sense of the timeline for the evening and then give you all a chance to ask some questions. So, with that, I want to lift up our fifth principle. tonight, because that is our focus. That principle states that the most directly affected people are experts at their own lives. We say it again, most directly affected people are experts at their own lives. Um, and what we mean by that is that those most directly affected by racial injustice and oppression of all kinds should be in leadership, at the center of our movement, and really telling our stories directly. Um, we say and believe in standing in the movement, standing with the movement for Black lives at a time when things like voting rights are being threatened at every turn. Um, Black people are being denied most basic of rights, the right to vote and have adequate, and are not having adequate representation in our country. And so, we are working toward a time when all Black life is valued, in which Black life is not discarded, in which Black Lives Matter, right? And in which the work of Black people is really seen um, as equal to anyone else's work. And so we are excited to really lift up Black voices in this conversation and in all of our subsequent conversations. So happy to have everybody here with us to really go deep. So let's go ahead and dive on in. Kris, you ready?
Yes, I'm
Uh,
ready.
awesome. Um, so one of the things that we have been thinking about, one of the ways that we frame these questions is to think about what feels particularly real and relevant to you, and to all of us with respect to the fifth principle. And so, Kris, I'm wondering if you could just say a little bit to us about what does feel particularly real and relevant to you with respect to this principle.
Um, Actually, I struggled with it
Mm-hmm,
a little bit. Because it feels real and relevant to me all the time,
mm-hmm,
but yet I'm constantly feeling the weight and exhaustion of fighting to feel valued
yes, yeah,
in every space that I interact in, except my own home.
mm-hmm,
So actually, when I was looking at the principal, I was excited because I'm like, yes, I am the expert.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
But then I'm like, but why does no one else see that?
mm-hmm,
So for me, it wasn't, I saw it as I don't want to just be seen as the expert of my own experience. I don't want to have to be the expert of what it's like to carry the impact of racial injustice and oppression. I
mm-hmm.
don't want to have to explain it to people that don't get it.
Right, that's right.
And I don't want to only be valued in exclusively Black spaces.
Mm-hmm,
I want to be valued in those spaces and outside of those spaces.
that's right.
Just because I want to be valued as an equal human being.
Mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm,
I realize something that's a part of that is fighting for a space to have my own voice, but also with the communities I work in,
right,
there's been a challenge of, well, why am I sharing my story when no one's going to listen to it? Or they're going to change what I say to fit what they're trying to promote.
right.
So when trying to figure out what felt real and relevant, I came up with more questions
Yes,
related to that. So
yeah, yeah,
that was how I related to that,
yeah. That's
to the
good.
fifth principle.
Right, absolutely. And it makes a lot of good sense. Part of what's particularly relevant about this principle is that there is um, this constant sense of nudging, right? Constant nudging of people to pay attention, right? to pay attention, to understand. How many times have I said to all sorts of people, y'all, it's 2019. It's 2019. We should not be where we are right now. We should be farther along than where we are right now. And in some ways, that is what hits at the value of um, Black sacred space, right? And particularly with respect to racial inequities and racial injustice, right? There are folks in the room when all of us are together. There are folks in the room who aren't going to get it because it's not their lived experience. Now, in a perfect world, because someone recognizes that something is not their lived experience, that they would move out of the way, right? Just move out of the way and ensure that there is room for those of us who have that particular lived experience. At the same time, um, the need for someone else to move out of the way, like I'm tired of that. Like I hear you. Like in some level, it's like let's just create our own space. Let's just make our own spaces. So we don't need anybody else to move. We can just make our own moves in spaces that have the most meaning to us, right? Um, there wouldn't be any question about Black leadership in Black sacred space because it's us. So I hear you. I hear you. I hear you. I hear you. Thank you for offering the complexity of that, right? Because it isn't just about ensuring that there's Black leadership. I would want that to be the case, but we also know that the struggle that comes along with that, right? We know the struggle that comes along with that. Thank you for that. Um, you touched on, this idea of just being tired, right? Um, how would you envision and create spiritual communities for Black UUs that center those typically left on the margins of other ministries? How would you do that? What does that vision look like for you? How would you create communities, spiritual communities that take that into consideration?
Again, I actually struggled with that one
Mm-hmm.
because the UU experience that I'm most familiar with is predominantly white.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually could not see how to create
Mm-hmm.
a space that center Blackness within that
Right.
UU experience that I have had the most experience with.
Mm-hmm.
The closest I have gotten to that has been revival.
Yeah.
That
Yes. Yes. Yes.
that was my first and only since then exposure. Just because of where I live and travel.
Mm-hmm.
So I struggled with how to create that type of community without the need to separate
Mm-hmm.
from the UU community that I know of. I honestly don't know how to do both
Mm-hmm.
at the same time
Right.
because my energy is split and the exhaustion and the fight I found ends up carrying over so that I'm actually too tired and exhausted and need time to self-care and cope and heal before I even enter the blue spaces.
Yes.
And I have found that that struggle has actually been a barrier for me being able to answer that question.
Yeah.
Um, that's I struggled
Yeah.
honestly with that question for those reasons.
Yeah. That
Um,
that's real. That's real. I mean, we have talked um, quite a bit in our various spaces um, as folks who were a part of the leadership of BLUU about what it means that, like the fact that being uh, fully realized and self-actualized as UUs, and also being fully realized and self-actualized as Black people are often at odds in the UU spaces that we tend to know, or that we tend to find ourselves in, right? Like that it is in so many places and spaces too hard to show up in all of our Blackness and in all of our Unitarian Universalism at the same time in the spaces that have thus far been created. But there's a reason why that is, right? The reason why that is because these spaces were not um, they were not created with us in mind, right?
Yeah.
Worship often isn't developed with us in mind. Um, how decisions get made, they don't happen in ways that have us and our lives and our experiences in mind most often, right? You will find, a few exceptions, but there might really only be a few. And so, I think you actually, in some ways, as much as that question was a struggle for you, in some ways you answered the question, right? Which is like, okay, I can't imagine this in the spaces that exist. The only way I can imagine this is in Black sacred space. And that is one space where that can happen, right? Um, I end up doing quite a bit of radical welcome work, primarily around sexuality and gender, in Unitarian Universalist spaces and other spaces as well. And one of the things that we talk a lot about is the real work that has to happen in here, like internally, the work that has to happen among the people who are in these spaces that many of us would like to call home. The intense heart work and mind work and body work that white folks, um, non-black people of color, and sometimes even black folks, right? The real intense work that folks have to do to recognize what it means um, for all of us to be fully realized and self-actualized as black people in the same places where we are showing up as UU, right? Um, and it takes work that not everyone is willing to do, right? We have all had these experiences where folks are going to struggle to do that hard work, and some folks just aren't interested in doing that work at all. Um, yes, Carlos says yes, very hard to show up in my full Blackness. That's right. And so, in some ways, you answered the question. Like, how do we do this? Well, we co-create our own spaces. Um, that is certainly a way that can work best, um, in my opinion. And I think other people would probably agree with me. Um, what would a culture? Let's take put aside the fact, if we can, right? Um, that in the spaces where we find ourselves, in the UU spaces we find ourselves, um, put aside the fact, yes, people have work to do. Yes, there are things that there are things that we can offer in these spaces, that we do offer in these spaces over and over and over again. Um, but what would a culture of radical welcome look like from the beginning? Like, if you could wipe the slate clean, Kris, what would that look like? What would a culture of radical welcome be? What would that be? What words would you use to describe that? What actions would need to be taken?
I actually, if you don't mind, I wrote down what my vision of that would look like if I
Yes,
could read that
yes,
so I
please.
get the words right. Um,
Absolutely. Tell us.
so it started with integration versus inclusion because those two words are often, I find, if people are saying inclusion, when what's really happening is integration. They're
Hmm.
just sharing the same space.
Right.
Um, and for inclusion to happen, I found that there has to be an viewed equal value of the people in the space.
Right.
Um,
That's right.
but my vision was actually grounded in a culture of radical welcome. If I were to be able to start that from the beginning,
Hmm.
it would mean that I would not just be existing or surviving, but rather it would be where I could live fully and freely, equal and valued in every part of who I am,
Mm.
body and soul, without apology, without code switching,
Mm.
and without repeated trauma. That I would have a chance to live in a society where the culture of that society creates space for my vision to exist every moment of every day.
Hmm.
On top of that,
Yeah, say all the things.
after I said my vision for the culture, I realized that I also wanted that vision for how I treated myself
Mm.
too. Um, and that is something that I didn't realize through untethering with that which doesn't create that type of space, that I'm doing the work to create that type of culture within how I interact and view myself as well. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
That
Yes.
was that.
I am reminded of I think it's our second principle, right? That second piece that you talked about, which in some ways is the beginning of the conversation. Um, when you were talking about wanting all of that for yourself and believing that all of that is possible for yourself, right? I'm actually reminded of our second principle, right? Which is that love and self love is practiced in every element of all we do, right? Love and self love is practice. Um, and part of what that does is it uh, helps us move away from, and you know, I talk about this often, particularly in spaces where, and this in some ways leads to this next question, then particularly in spaces where UUs are saying, well, there isn't enough money for X or Y or Z. I often bring up this idea of, you know, many of us, far too many of us, operate um, in scarcity thinking, and not nearly enough of us are operating in abundance thinking, right? It, this notion that, like, once we're at a place where we are practicing love and self love, like, really believing, like, yes, I actually can have this. I can be this. I can live this, whatever this is. I mean, in this particular moment, I'm thinking of a space in Unitarian Universalism where we can be realized and self actualized. Like, yes, this is possible. Um, like, it is at that moment that we can do that first piece, right? Everything that you offered is this incredible vision for a world where we can really all just show up fully as ourselves and live into leadership, being our full selves or not. Um, you know, offering up ourselves in this space, whatever those spaces are, in a way that gives us life and not in ways that make us exhausted and ready to be done, right? How many of us have said, I'm done? Far too many of us have said, I'm done with all of this. And some of that is us taking care of ourselves, right? Because that matters too. Um, it matters too that we're able to do that. But you really touched on it. Being able to have those things, believe all of that for ourselves, and live all of that for ourselves, um, and then build the spaces that make that real, where we're living that out in real ways. That's really, really powerful. Thank you for that. Um, hmm. What resources do you think are needed to make your vision happen?
The one resource I thought of kind of ties into what you were saying about scarcity versus abundance.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, when thinking about resources, it's having open eyes, open ears, and open heart, and open doors.
Mm,
It's I used to, when working in human services, look at, okay, this is what we have the budget for, this is the grants. And I realized that from that perspective, I had a limited view.
mm-hmm.
So when I thought of the open eyes, open ears, open heart, open doors, it keeps the idea that resources are unlimited.
Right.
It's just always having them open so that when something comes up or someone saying something or you see something,
Mm-hmm.
how can that be used as a resource?
Right. That's right.
And the second part was actually, I couldn't think of concrete resources that aren't already being used. Um, but I also thought of one really good resource is actually continually creating space for people to be the author of their own stories,
Mm,
needs, and ideas and visions,
right.
and holding space for the silence, because sometimes people come quickly
Yeah.
and sometimes it's a more slower process, especially if it's new.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and oftentimes it's the people
Yeah.
that bring the resources,
That's right.
not just this grant, but it's someone that might lead you to a new grant, or they might bring this skill, or they might have this
Mm,
connection that grows the network, similar to with BLUU,
yeah. Yeah.
how it started and where it is today and where it will be in the future.
Yeah.
Um, I kind of thought about that more as the backbone of resources,
Mm-hmm.
rather than concrete, because I couldn't really think of any in my direct area
Yeah.
either
Yeah.
that weren't already being used.
Yeah.
So
I think the the piece you touched on it. I'm so glad you said that. Uh, the resources is us. That the resources is us, right? Our hearts, um, our minds, our bodies, our spirits. Part of the resources is us. Um, whenever we uh, spend time talking about radical welcome in the circles that I'm in, um, we often say, this work of building spaces that are radically welcoming comes, yes, yes, people can put money toward it, right? Yes, people can put time into it. Time is a resource. Um, but what really happens is what's going on in here, like this sense of like all of the connections. Like for me, that's what spirituality is, right? It's a recognition of the space between you and me, right? The spaces between us is spirituality and spirit for me. And so how do how do we build upon and strengthen those connections um, to help ensure that we're all getting what we need? But it begins with relationship too, right? Relationship is a resource. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for growth. It's an opportunity to learn new things. It's an opportunity to be made new, um, right? Like the hope in these community conversations is that folks would be made new, that folks would learn something, hear something new, um, take something with them to guide them in their Unitarian Universalism, to guide all of us, to build us up, right? So this space is a resource, and I feel like we need more of these spaces, right? More of these spaces, more of this opportunity to connect, more of this ability to build relationship and be in relationship in ways that actually foster healing and wholeness. Um, that remind us that it's that a Unitarian Universalism means more than just showing up. That we're going to be transformed by what happens in our spaces. The transformation is part of our faith. And I don't know that we spend as much time on that, in at least not in our brick and mortar congregations. Um, I know that we try and really focus in on it in the spaces that matter to us here with BLUU. But all of that, all of those things are resources. All of those things can build us up um, as individuals, as people, and as communities, right? So thank you for sharing all of that. Um, how do you think this particular principle, Kris, can guide us in living out a Unitarian Universalism that centers Blackness? What is it about this principle that can guide us in that way, in a way that allows us to center Blackness in our Unitarian Universalism?
For me, what struck out to me and that I keep coming back to um, is actually the value
Mm-hmm.
that Black lives have value.
Mm.
I have value.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that is the case no matter how I'm being treated otherwise. That value doesn't decrease, it stays exactly the same. I always have value. I'm always the expert of my own experience, my own life.
Right.
And what I realized is actually that Unitarian Universalism centered in Blackness, my value is never at question.
Right.
It's never questioned.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If I hold myself in that type of sacred value,
Mm-hmm.
then for me, no one can tell me how to live my faith.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I think that's what the difference between the Unitarian Universalism that I know of versus that's centered in Blackness, and how this principle helps me is it actually allows me to take back
Yeah.
my faith as my own,
That's right.
and that between me and the universe, not something that is owned and decided by my brick and mortar congregation.
Right. That's it.
That's that's how it was for me.
Mm.
It was kind of a taking back experience. That principle was a taking back
Right.
what was originally and always is mine.
That's right. That's right. Thank you so much. so much, Kris, for that, um, especially for that taking back, right? So much of us have lost so much, right, in the way of recognition of our own value as Black folks in these spaces. Um, so much has been taken away in terms of our understanding of our own spirit and spirituality and faith. Um, so many attempts, right, to take that away, directly and indirectly. Um, and the thing that you honed in on, that this principle offers, is a way to say, actually, no, I know exactly what I'm talking about because I know exactly who I am. I know exactly what my faith calls me to do. I know exactly how to understand my faith as a UU. And that is a journey that I am taking and will take, right? Um, and that, honestly, I would love for you to understand it. And if you don't, that doesn't make it any less true for me, right? Um, and that is deeply powerful, deeply, deeply powerful. Because at the end of the day, that is about us really valuing and loving ourselves. And that, and it's in those spaces that we really shift and move and are made whole. So thank you for all of your insight and your care and thinking about these questions. I really appreciate it. But this is deep and powerful work, um, and it is ours. And there is love in it. There is healing in it. There is transformation in it. And so I want to thank Kris for being with us tonight. I want to thank everybody who joined us, um, and offer up just a few of the takeaways. We talked about some of them already, right? Like this idea that our biggest resource in building and being the place where we are most valued, our biggest resource is us. It is all of our hearts, all of our bodies, all of our minds, all of our spirits, right? We talked about having the opportunity to be with kinfolk, right? That there's deep value in that, right? That it matters that we're able to struggle and heal and be transformed among people who we consider family. We talked about, I believe it was Cecilia who offered up this culture of avoidance and complacency, and thinking about this particular principle as a way of overcoming that, right? Like we are ready to be our whole beautiful and messy and complicated selves as Black people, and we all have value, and we all have so much to offer um, to spaces that will help us grow and be better humans, right? Um, hmm. Sometimes we have to. I really appreciated this comment. Sometimes we have to set up our own space within other spaces, and that is really true. Sometimes that is what we need. Um, I also appreciated, and I believe Carla lifted this up too, Kris, your willingness, to say, I wasn't sure about that. I wasn't sure about that one, um, about where to go with that and how to envision that. But ultimately, what you landed on, I think, was really powerful and really clear, which is, in order for us to show up in our fullness as Black folks and as UUs, right, to be fully realized and fully self-actualized as Black folks who claim Unitarian Universalism in all of the ways that we claim it and proclaim it and understand it. Sometimes what that means is that we need often. And perhaps for some of us, maybe even all the time, what that means is that we need to be doing that in spaces where it is just us, because our value isn't going to be questioned in those spaces, and in those places. And so I'm grateful for all that all of us have offered up and shared. Um, what a cultural radical welcome looks like from the beginning is really us showing up and co-creating those spaces together. This is part of what that looks like. You know, saying in, I believe it was, goodness, maybe September, October of last year, hey, we need to do theology in a big way and center our Blackness. Somebody said it out loud, and we were like, yeah, let's just go do that. you know, we didn't know what that was going to look like and mean. We weren't entirely sure who would show up for it. We hadn't asked a single special guest to come. And what we have found is that there is richness and beauty and joy and power in our ability to be real and to wrestle and to make a way. And that's what we're doing. And we'll continue to do that, right? All of that won't end tonight, thank goodness. We have one, my goodness, one more community conversation where we will focus on our seventh principle, which is a 360 vision, where we honor the work and wisdom of our elders and ancestors, and we're mindful of the fact that what we do now, how we show up now, will have all of the impact on what we can build and grow together for the future. So we're excited for that seventh community conversation, the last one. It will be on Wednesday, September 25th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. All of us as the organizing collective board will be here. And also our elders, our 360 council will also be in that conversation. So we are really, really excited for that last conversation. And of course, all of this had us on the road leading up to the symposium, Harper Jordan Memorial Symposium. It's happening October 30th through November 2nd in St. Paul, Minnesota. We just started building the final checklist, y'all. It is happening. It is happening. There are, I think, 93 or 4 people registered. It is going to be quite something. I hope folks are able to come. And if you really want to come and don't have resources, let us know. We'll see what we can do. It is a really beautiful moment, and we are really excited about what is possible. This is also the first BLUU space that we are offering that is welcome to all. So there will be Black folks there, non-Black people of color, and also white folks in the space with a priority. We're giving priority to Black, Indigenous people of color, so we're excited for that. So the conversation continues, and we are really thrilled that we get to learn and grow together in this space, online, and in other spaces in person. So with that, I wanted to give you, Kris, an opportunity to offer any closing remarks. If there's anything burning for you or any last words you want to share, I would love for you to offer them now.
I just wanted to say thank you once again for the opportunity to be a part of this space and hearing from everyone. I needed to be a part of this space tonight without realizing it. That happens every time I join a BLUU space, but I wanted to thank you everyone too for what you've offered and what it's done for me tonight as well. So
Wonderful.
thank you.
Wonderful. It is always a gift to be among you. Deeply grateful for this space and so many others that we will co-create together. Please don't stop having these conversations. If anything else comes up for you, don't hesitate to share it in the group, in the closed group. Um, don't hesitate to reach out to me or to Kia or anyone if you want to continue to have these conversations in all kinds of ways. We are open and ready. Whatever we need to do to build up our folks, we're excited to do. So thank you all for being here tonight. Take good care. Thank you, thank you, Kris, and let's keep doing it, y'all. We are doing theology in a big way, and let's continue to center our Blackness and our Unitarian Universalism. Thanks for being here, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care. Good night.